Welcome to this special webinar from Washington Policy Center. It's an update on restarting the Washington state economy and the planning efforts with the governor's office. Joining me today will be Mark Harmsworth, our Small Business Center Director, as well as the Pierce County Executive Bruce Dammeier. And because we had some technical difficulties, the minority leader of the State House, JT Wilcox, will be joining us, but he's joining us by phone only. So we'll hear from him, but you won't actually see him. Now, the way this is going to work is I'll introduce Mark. We'll talk about some of the issues that we're facing and his point of view on those. And then we'll hear from Executive Dammeier and Representative JT Wilcox, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. There is a question function on your GoToWebinar on the right-hand side on your toolbox. Use that to send me questions. I'll be going through them. I'll disappear because I'll be voicing those questions later on in the program when we get to the Q&A, which won't be too long. With that, I'd like to bring on the line here Mark Harmsworth, our Center for Small Business Director. Mark, take it away.
Thanks, Dave, for having us on today, and I appreciate the opportunity and for Executive Dammeier and Representative Wilcox going to be joining us today, which is great. We're facing obviously some very critical times as we go through this COVID-19 crisis that we're in right now, and people are starting to ask questions about how do we start getting out of this, how do we start getting back to work, how do we kickstart this economy after being down for so long. And we thought in the Washington Policy Center it would be good to hear from some of our local leaders in the state to hear about what they've been doing and what they've been working with the governor's office, see if we get any insight into when we can expect or the types of things we can expect in the future as we progress through the COVID-19 crisis. Things that we've been particularly interested in from the Policy Center's perspective, and things that we're focused on are encouraging industry groups to come up with guidelines to help government figure out what is reasonable as far as COVID-19 recommendations as we restart. I know the industries, particularly the construction industry, which has been the focus for the last few weeks, but as we start getting into retail and into other industries, they're going to need clear guidelines on how to restart their industries and the types of activities and the types of things they're going to need to do, whether that's social distancing or masks, as we've seen in some other states, and those types of things. I know our small businesses are looking for certainty in the schedule, or at least the criteria that will be used to reopen again. This is going to be really important for those small businesses that are looking at their payroll. I had a phone call this morning from a small business that said, how long is this going to last for? They feel that they can go another 3 weeks, and they're willing to make those investments if they know what the game plan is and where this is going. But they're really looking for those criteria, and that would help them. If this is open-ended, then you're going to see a lot of small businesses saying, hey, we're cooked at this point. We just can't carry on without that certainty. So we need that certainty in what's going on. And we also need to start that planning process now. There's no reason why we can't wait until beginning of May before we start. We need to be able to start that process now. And I know the industry groups, individual companies, and our legislative representatives, both in county, city, and legislative government, state level government, are now working on that. And hopefully today we can hear some of that from both Executive Dammeier and JT Wilcox, Representative Wilcox. And so I'm looking forward to hearing that as well. There will be an opportunity for questions a little bit later on. David Boze is our host, as you've already seen. What I'd like to do now is introduce Executive Dammeier, Pierce County Executive, and just take it away, Bruce. Tell us what you've been doing from your county's perspective. I know there was a letter that you sent out recently to the governor on construction specifically, so I'd be interested in your thoughts on that and other things that you're actively doing and any information that you've got from a Pierce County perspective.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and talk with your audience today. This is obviously, in using my Navy vernacular, we are in serious uncharted waters. We haven't seen anything like this. Obviously, in our lifetime, I think you've got to go back to probably to the post-World War II, coming out of World War II and going into World War II, before you had our society dealing with anything remotely like this. I will tell you that in Pierce County, we're probably, I guess I'm thankful for how our community has responded to it. First, in response to the outbreak, I think our community has really stepped up. We have embraced social distancing. We have tried to follow kind of the rules to the greatest degree possible. And I think we've made some very good decisions here. And I think it has shown up in the numbers. You know, at this point in Pierce County, we're at about 1,058 cumulative cases for the county, which is a lot, but it's certainly we have not been hit as hard as our neighbors to the north. At the same time, we just had our 25th death here in Pierce County, which is obviously very, very concerning. I would say that our deaths have predominantly been those over 70 with significant underlying health conditions. It's not to diminish those. If that's your mother, I mean, those are amazing individuals, and many who kind of were part of that greatest generation or close to it. As we, you know, come out of that's important. But it is, and I would say that how we've responded to support our senior care centers has been particularly important. So that's in kind of how we've responded medically to the outbreak. How we've responded as a community, I think, is very impressive. And I know it's happened in other communities. I'd like to think it's unique to Pierce County, but I could give you story after story of how folks have come together in unique ways to work together to confront this challenge. If there's anything positive that comes out of the coronavirus, certainly in our nation and absolutely in Pierce County, it's just how it brings people together. When you talk about things like community groups that have been sewing masks, when you talk about neighborhood bloodmobiles that are so well subscribed that they've got to bring 2 bloodmobiles to a neighborhood. When you talk about Pierce County Sheriff's deputies every night reading a book that they video and they put up on their social media, reading a book so the kids can have somebody reading a book to them at night, kind of stories with the sheriff. That's been incredibly responded to by the community. And then there's, you know, our school districts. I had the chance to see some incredible work by Franklin Pierce School District alone, typical of all the districts in Pierce County. But Franklin Pierce School District, I had the opportunity to go along with them and to see how the lunch staff and the bus drivers and everybody came together around the mission of supporting their students, willing to put off the fact that they were kind of having to do their job quite a bit differently than it was in the past, dramatically differently. But they were committed to the mission of serving those students in that community, and to see them and to see the school principal and vice principal and the superintendent out there and the school resource officer out there helping delivering meals to families that have a lot of need and their children was just amazing. I could continue with story after story, but now the issue is how we come out. This has been very difficult on Pierce County. The last number I saw, and this was a week-old number, is our unemployment rate went from about 5.5% up to 18%. I expect it's well over 20 today. That is hugely significant. We are, and our community is paying a really significant toll for that, as we are throughout the state of Washington and as we are throughout the nation. But for me, at this point, I am still paying close attention to the medical response to our current outbreak, but my focus is more on how are we coming out? How do we come out of this? How do we restart and help our economy recover? Then how do we make sure that if we go into another outbreak, how do we do that differently? Some specific things that we have done here in Pierce County. One of the things that we did is we put in place our own small business loan program. And that was specifically, I had a lot of confidence that the state had made a commitment there, and I believe that money would show up. And the feds had made a significant investment there, and I knew that money would show up. But I knew it would not come quickly, and it wouldn't come with some fits and starts and startup issues. So we did a kind of put a small business loan program in place that you come down to talk to our folks and you fill out the form right there, and then we can get that. We got that loan to them in less than a week. And that was getting that money to help keep that payroll going, help make that rent, help keep things going. We saw it as a bridge between what they would need to get them to that state and to that federal money, right? We wanted to be that bridge to make sure they could continue to stay afloat until those other resources came to bear. So I think that has been a very good small business loan program. One of the things we've been working on from the beginning, as Mark mentioned, has been construction. Construction is a significant part of Pierce County's economy. Not only do we want people investing in building and investing in the infrastructure to build great jobs and great communities here in Pierce County, but I'll tell you that construction makes up about 7% of our jobs, but about 9% of our earnings, and 22% construction jobs on average pay 22% more than the average job in Pierce County. So these are good jobs, and they have a whole trail of very positive things for our economy, including, real estate transactions, including sales tax on construction materials, including future jobs associated with that new capital investment. So it's a very, very good thing. And obviously, with construction and with all jobs, county jobs, city jobs, private sector jobs, nonprofit jobs, first responders, healthcare, everybody's got to be able to do that job in a safe manner. That's got to be the baseline. But once you make sure you can do it safely, then we really want to prioritize those jobs that deliver a high impact to our economy. And that's what we're focusing on right now, is trying to make sure that we're turning the dial. I like to say that we switched our society off like a light switch, and we're going to turn it on with a dimmer. So it's going to be a little slower than any of us, I think, would like. But I think we need to start in particular with those high value jobs that have a lot of impact, where you can have very little, if any, public health risk. So I'm focusing on that. It's about getting Pierce County and our citizens back to work so they can take control of their lives again and have the dignity that comes with not just having to sit at home and wait. There's a lot of consequences to that. But that's what I would use to start off with today, Mark, and I look forward to hearing JT's comments and answering questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bruce. JT, do you want to weigh in and give us an update on what you've been doing with the governor's office and your thoughts on currently where we are in this process?
JT, you might have to unmute yourself, Representative.
Thank you very much. I just want to say first, Pierce County is an example to Washington and maybe the rest of the country when it comes to a county that has divided government. It's a purple county, but they have not let politics get in the way. They have worked hard and have a great record. When you look at the mortality rate, tremendous record of having exposure to COVID, yet keeping the mortality rate very low, and then almost immediately shifting gears into let's work on the economy, because we can't do just one thing at a time. We have to do safety, public health, and at the same time, we have to save as much of our economy as we possibly can. And I'll admit, I cannot tell you how frustrated I am to be in the legislature right now, because this is being run by the executive branch. There are a series of laws that give the executive branch the power to do the things that they are doing. And there has been communication, not always as plentiful as I would like, but the legislative liaison for the governor has been very easy to reach. And the constant message that I have sent to him is what I just said. We have to do more than one thing at a time, and we need to start planning immediately for how do we get the economy going again. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Probably the most important is the dreams of the owners of small businesses and the staff of small businesses that they're watching being crushed. And it is so hard for them because they see the inconsistencies and the sometimes unfair nature of the initial stay-home order, and they wonder why we can't rationalize this and why we can't look at the safest ways to return to work. The most eloquent explanation of that I've seen came out today by a entrepreneur and businessman named DJ Wilson, and he is calling this an extinction level event in our economy. He talks about it's like being the dinosaurs, hearing the impact of a meteor and watching the dust clouds gather. And that's the way I and most business people feel. I just got off a conference call with the governor's chief of staff, and it's plain that they're beginning to listen, but they're only in the beginning. And I'm really using their words in saying that they're beginning of studying how they're going to do this safely. And I totally agree with their commitment to doing this safely. And I've been very supportive of the governor's quick move that I think saved an immense amount of sickness and death in Washington. Washington is an example to the rest of the country in how you start this. But you start it with kind of a meat cleaver, and you come out of it with a scalpel. And I every day am urging them to take out the scalpel, start looking at how can we bring business back online that doesn't result in additional danger and exposure. And we have some great examples out there. First of all, we've got an example of an industry that functioned from day one with immense exposure to the public. That's the grocery industry. And I just talked to a high executive in the grocery industry and asked them about the infection rate among their staff. And they said, well, there have been a small number of infections, but it's been minimal. And they didn't mean it was minimal to the people that were put at risk, but in terms of, you know, what one would expect from probably the industry with the greatest amount of public exposure, it's been surprisingly small. And that tells me that an industry that took social distancing and precautions seriously has been able to operate very safely from the very beginning in this crisis. And I've pointed that example out to the governor's staff as, you know, this is how you start this process up again. Now, I've also seen some examples of how scary it can get if we don't do this right. And we absolutely cannot go out in an uncontrolled way, because we will be in a catastrophe. And I recently read a story. A lot of you know that my family's in the food processing business, and I've spent most of my life managing food processing plants. There is a large meatpacking plant in South Dakota that now has 500 staff members sick with COVID. And, you know, food processing staff is often pretty young. Most of them will probably be okay. The people that will pay the price for that, you know, uncontrolled infection will be their parents and grandparents who they have likely been visiting. And so we can't just open things up with absolutely no control. And the House Republicans have consistently said, we want to do this safely, but we need to start soon, or maybe right away. And one of the things that I guess I'm very concerned about is that the process, by the way, the governor's emergency order, the current one ends on May 4th. The process for reopening has to start way before May 4th. You can't get to May 4th and then say, okay, now we'll think about how to reopen. Now, it's true that there have been some, I think, fruitful industry interactions. And the one that I'm most familiar with is the one involving all kinds of construction. And they made a proposal to the governor along with their labor partners yesterday. And the governor's office has said that they will consider that. I hope that they consider it quickly, accept it. It involves going in safe phases, and then we can begin to use that as a model for other industry groups. I think the trade associations are really critical now. They're absolutely earning their dues, and the ones that are successfully interacting with the governor's office are the ones that are going to see their business sectors reopen the earliest, because I get the strong impression from the governor's office that they are going to do this piecemeal and through negotiation rather than just simply opening up big sectors. You know, I'm used to managing a company or managing processing plants. I'm used to being able to call the shots myself, and that is never the way that it is in the legislature. You are always one out of 147 legislators, and in this case, we're not in session. The governor has immense powers that are granted to him by his emergency powers that were passed by the legislature over the last 40 years. So I'm in the position of just trying to forcefully convince him and hope that, and his staff mainly, and hope that my background in business and in legislation gives me the chance to convince them. But I would also say that anybody that cares about how we exit this stay at home, whenever that is, contacts the governor's office and makes it plain, there is an immense price to pay. And his success as a governor and our success as a state and country are totally dependent right now on making sure that we have two priorities: be safe and reopen the economy. Thanks for the opportunity to give that speech. I've been dying to say that to a group.
Thanks, JT. David, I know that we're getting a lot of questions online right now. Do you want to start parsing through those and figuring out, getting some of these questions asked of the three of us here?
Absolutely. I'm a multitasker, so I'm ready to roll on that. My name's David Boze. I'm the Communications Director for Washington Policy Center. Because the light is so bright behind me, I'm just going to close myself off and be the voice of God for questioning here to make it a better visual experience for everyone anyway. First question is, has the governor explained why it's safe for grocery and Boeing workers to be on the job, but not other businesses like construction? Can't they all use the same kind of safety protocols?
JT, would you want to take a stab at that?
I'd love to answer that. There's not been a day that goes by where that question hasn't been posed. There has not been an answer. And I guess the thing that I have continually responded to his staff with is, look, when you have an initial order that I don't blame you for, you had to get something out quick, but you haven't adjusted it. When people feel that it is so plainly unfair and doesn't make sense, in the long run, and maybe in the short run, you're going to lose your ability to mobilize the public to follow your instructions to be safe. And so whether you think that this is a good move or not from a strict epidemiological point of view, you need to retain your office's moral authority, and people need to feel like this is not capricious. And many of the rules are capricious at this point. And I'm hoping that they will take that point, because that is, I think there's a rising chorus of voices that is going to be hard for them to ignore.
Next question.
Mark,
go ahead.
Mark, I'd like to respond to that one really quickly, or David. First of all, I would say from my discussions with the governor, and I've had, you know, my most recent one kind of face to face when we talked about this, when I was making, I thought, the case for construction, I can tell you that I think he feels not only the value of the job and whether you can be, he sees that there's being safe at the job, but there's also all the activity generated with you working, you going to the job, you being out on our roads. I know that also is a concern for him, because I've heard him state that. And I do know he looks to a reasonable degree at traffic counts as one of the indicators of the success of our social distancing. So I know that those are some of the thoughts behind him. Other than that, you'd have to ask him yourself.
Has he explained how it is that people in cars are not socially distant enough from each other?
Well, I think he would say that the act of traveling, all the activity of traveling here and to and from, it increases exposure and increases opportunity for the virus to spread. That would be his concern, I believe.
Next question, has the governor given any indication that he would ease up on construction and other industries to open gradually, either before May 4th or soon thereafter?
Well, in his press conference yesterday, he was asked that, and his answer was, I believe, not soon. And I don't have any other indication other than the fact that this is probably the industry where the discussions between labor, business, and the governor's office are the farthest advanced.
Yeah, I would say that these discussions have been gone. I know when there was discussion about the extension to May 4th, one of the specific things that came up at about that time frame by a variety of governments that were having input was that they felt we should be loosening up on construction, that felt that construction in many cases could be done safely. And if it could be done safely, then the value to our community was significant enough that that should be where you should start. And that was from folks kind of from the government side, let alone the industry side.
Next question, what will a company's liability be for COVID-19 moving forward? Have there been any conversations about that?
Well, I've asked that in a couple of contexts. First of all, because there has been some talk about local governments just going ahead and issuing a proclamation that would allow construction, for example, in their own areas. And I've been told that the consequences could be fines and the loss of a business license. In my own company, we've looked at potential liability and talked with counsel about that. And we've been told that, yes, you do have liability for people that may catch COVID and can make the case that that happened in the workplace. And that is one more reason, is if you needed more, to take all the proper precautions. And I would think that that liability could be even greater if it happened at a time when the business that you were engaged in had been under the stay-home order.
So I would say just quickly, in Pierce County, we are still doing all of the county public projects. That's because I think they serve a public purpose, and I want those jobs out in our community as long as they're done safely. And at this point, we believe they are being done safely. So we've got all those projects still going. As for the liability for COVID, my recommendation would be to talk to your attorney. That anything that JT or I say isn't going to have a lot of bearing. You've got to get specific legal advice for your specific situation as a business.
Just a follow up on that question. Do you believe that L&I would be pushing to do site inspections for folks that are working illegally? I mean, I've heard anecdotal stories about L&I showing up at job sites unannounced and telling folks to go home. What authority do you see them having in this situation? Maybe this is more for JT than it is for Bruce, but for Bruce, go ahead. Looks like you're about to start.
So I guess I would say I have no stories of L&I shutting down anybody in Pierce County that I'm aware of. I do have a story of the Washington State Patrol shutting down a job site. That job site then made some accommodations and are still doing, and I think today they are working. But they were shut down by the State Patrol.
You know, I've heard in our caucus calls quite a few stories about various agencies exerting themselves to shut things down. I really don't think that the governor's office is looking for a confrontation. I think they'd rather not have a confrontation, but they may not walk away if there's a blatant violation.
The other thing I would say, I do believe that part of the discussions around opening construction involve around how do you assure that some of the new COVID related precautions are followed. And there is a question as to who should determine that. And I would say that, well, I don't want Pierce County building inspectors necessarily in that role. I do think we need to recognize that we are in an emergency, and during the emergency period, we might allow or need to do some things differently that don't extend beyond the emergency period, right? This is about finding ways to get things done to better our community for the safety of our community and the well-being of our community. That's why we have emergency powers as executives, so we can move more quickly and respond more effectively, and in many cases kind of cut through the red tape that maybe they're well-intended and for perhaps even a good reason during normal times, but these are not normal times.
This is a question, I guess, directed for you, Executive Dammeier. Are you aware of any dates that Governor Inslee is considering for reopening? And has he established criteria or metrics that are going to be used to decide when we can restart the economy? The second part being more focused toward JT.
So the only date that I am currently aware of is May 4th. And then I believe he is in the process of developing a variety of metrics and a way to do that. And I think he's trying to do a good job there. I will tell you though that part of our challenge here is this is an unknown virus, right? In terms of how it behaves, and there's things that we're learning every day about this virus that are different than we thought. I will tell you right now in Pierce County, we have been, in terms of our new cases per day and in our deaths, we've been pretty stable. We've been bumping in our new cases per day pretty much between 25 and 50, bouncing around there for over 10 days. So the good news is we have a lot of confidence that we are not accelerating, that we are flat, that we're not looking at a deteriorating situation. But it does raise the question of how long will it bump along flat like that, and when will it continue to go down? Our deaths continue to bump around between 0 and 3, and that's a tragic situation. Again, most of those are in some of our long-term care facilities. I think we've got a good strategy to limit that and protect those folks to a tremendous degree. But that's mostly what we're seeing right now is what I would call stable and flat, when we really want it to go. We would really like to see a downward trend more dramatically. I don't think we know when that's going to really come with this virus.
This is for Representative Wilcox. I think we're getting some feedback from your phone, Representative. What can landlords expect from the legislature to provide rental assistance for struggling tenants, and what can we expect after the moratorium? After the moratorium from evictions is lifted, if you could expand upon all the rental housing issues you're aware of. Landlords are now supporting many households who need to be able to pay bills themselves, and no other industry is being asked to provide goods and services without payment. Your comments.
Well, I leave most of the rental housing issues to my very capable seatmate and friend, Andrew Barkas. And there's no member of the legislature more engaged in their issue than Andrew is. And he's very discouraged about this, honestly. I do agree that no group has been asked to sacrifice more, other than perhaps people that are at the front lines in the medical world. But in terms of business, we have constantly asked the governor, I understand that you a eviction moratorium. Could you please, in your messaging, include the idea that if you can afford it, you should pay your rent, because other people depend on that cash flow. And this has been the most ideological issue in the legislature for the last 2 years, and it's not ending. In fact, I've got some indications that it is going to get worse before it gets better. I think something like rent control will be on the table in the near future, if it hasn't already been issued. This is not one where we're able to penetrate the governor's office with. And, we've heard an immense amount about how important housing is, about the housing crisis. And we have been saying for 4 weeks now that what's happening now is going to make the housing crisis much worse.
Dave, I have a question for JT. I hear a lot about folks and individual rights and what the state's doing to protect those rights in this crisis. What are you hearing from the governor's office on this issue, and how they consider constitutional and individual rights as we're working through this, and the types of things that they're having to implement to prevent the spread, but still respect our state constitution, obviously?
Yeah, I believe the governor believes himself to be on very solid legal ground. And I am very concerned about this as well. I've sought legal advice inside the legislature, and also from some very prominent attorneys that all of you would recognize recently on that question. And first of all, the laws under which he's exercising his power are common across the United States, and he has been acting within those laws. Now, a small number of his orders involving the suspension of specific laws or regulations are subject to review of the legislature after 30 days, or if we're not in session, then agreement by the 4 caucus leaders. We have agreed to those to date. There's been about 8 of them that have come up, and these are almost all a rollback of regulations on parts of the functioning economy, usually involving healthcare, so that they can provide better healthcare with less red tape. So I'm glad that they recognize that. We've approved those. A question that I've asked several times to attorneys that operate in the public sphere is if someone applied for an injunction with the claim that the laws that grant him his executive power are unconstitutional. And the answer that I've gotten more than once is yes, when 42 states are doing this, it's a long established practice in the United States, you would be laughed out of court. Probably there is no constitutional bar at this point, because emergency powers are well recognized. If we get to the point where most of the other states have ended their emergency, then you have a better opportunity to make the case that the emergency is being extended unreasonably. But I can tell you that members of my caucus are extremely concerned about this, and I think this is one thing where the governor is going to be very careful about how long he extends this. And I think he is concerned with how intrusive these things are. Now, there's one exception, perhaps. There was a recent federal court decision in Kentucky regarding a very egregious restriction of religious rights. And I sent that off to the attorneys I'm talking about, and we're going to be looking and see if there's anything to proceed from that. But the other thing that I've heard repeatedly, and probably most of you have heard this too, is the Constitution is not a suicide pact. And so it's always been recognized that under extraordinary circumstances, you can temporarily do things that otherwise we wouldn't see.
Okay, I got a breaking news email a little earlier from the Seattle Times saying that Boeing in Everett's returning back to work in phases next week. And that brings us to another question, which is from a viewer named Richard, who says CDC guidelines are say face covering, distancing, washing hands, no touching. They're suitable for all essential employees. Why not extend these things to all employees? And
I'll start. Yeah, I'll start to answer that. I think that this really gets at the issue of how we restart the economy and the recommendations, the guidelines that we need for small businesses to help them restart safely. And this applies across all business, not any one particular sector. If you're able to follow good, safe distancing guidelines, and whether that's through masks or through actual physical distance or a partial work at home or something like that, then those are the types of businesses that are able to do that, I think, should be afforded the ability to start sooner rather than later. And so, Boeing's obviously figured out and is talking about and promoting these steps and these guidelines. So they're trying to get that rolling. And I think that's one of the things that we need from Governor Inslee's office is, hey, if you can follow these types of guidelines when we get to a point where we feel it's ready to roll, then you should better reopen, irrespective of your industry, because we don't want to pick winners or losers here. We want to make sure that our industries go. But there also isn't a blanket statement here. I mean, there are industries that certainly afford themselves, and we've seen that right now in the public sector, where you think about even retail stores, you're able to get a Fred Meyer in these stores and have implemented certain things to give us good distancing. Why is it that other stores could not? As long as we're careful that we don't end up crowding the streets initially until we get through this social distancing phase. But why is that the case? And that's the guidelines, I think, that a lot of small businesses that have been reaching out to me are asking for, is how do we restart when this thing's ready to go? And can we start this any sooner? And so that would be my only comment on that, Dave.
I would say there's a couple of other things. I think you're going to see a lot of things done to both protect the employee and to engender confidence in the customer, right? This is a two-way street as we go back to work. Just because you open your store doesn't mean people will feel comfortable coming in there to buy your product. I am reminded that we're seeing, and in the county virtually, and I've seen it in a number of other places, any place where you have a cashier dealing with the public, you're going to see, I think, kind of almost across the board, these plexiglass, what are called kind of sneeze guards, right? You're going to be dealing at somebody behind a piece of plexiglass with the ability to hand your payment or whatever underneath. I think there's going to be a lot of things done, changes in how we do business, both to engender, again, protect the employee, but also engender confidence in the consumer.
And there are also some amazing best practices that are being developed almost daily. And I'd go back to the grocery industry. Every time someone goes to the store, they will see some new practice. I think the state of the art now, besides the spacing, is one-way aisles. And I do know that the advice that Lisa Brown, Director of Department of Commerce, has given is every business segment will be better off if they come to the governor with a plan rather than waiting for the governor to just issue guidelines. And that may change at some point, but at this point, I think being aggressive, especially if you've got an effective trade association, is really important.
Okay, next question. And Representative Wilcox, if you could mute your microphone when you're not talking, we're getting some feedback from your speaker there. Next question is, do we have sufficient hospital capacity and treatment protocols to allow our economy to start up? We were asked to stop the economy to assist our healthcare system and to prepare for a surge, and we did that. People will get sick, but we can't. But can't we make vulnerable populations protected and let the rest of us go back to work?
So I'll start with that. I think that is, when I talked at the beginning about how we respond differently to this situation going forward, right? We're hoping that we get down, we start to come back to normal. At some point, we know that the coronavirus is not gone out of our community. So what happens if it comes back, if COVID-19 comes back, or the next virus comes back? And I think we need to fundamentally look at how we do things differently. I think in this case, as we go forward, what I would hope we're going to see is first much more, and as a county executive, what I'm interested in for Pierce County is first of all, a significant kind of ongoing community surveillance testing, so we can have some good idea of what the condition of our community is broadly. And then obviously we're going to be focused much more closely on those vulnerable populations, safeguarding them. Think long-term care centers, senior care centers. And then I think what you will probably see is when somebody tests positive, a much more active position to get that person identified, do extensive contact tracing around that person, get that person in isolation, and get the people surrounding them in a quarantine situation. Other countries that have done this successfully have looked at quarantining not in your home where you could infect your family, but in an off-site location strictly designed for that purpose. I think the key is, how do we design these protocols going forward that you can restrict the spread, protect our vulnerable, and allow most of our economy to proceed? That's going to be the key as we go forward. We've got to be smart enough to be able to do all three of those things, and I think we are and will be. We just need to get some of the resources in place.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect as well. There's been an immense amount of strain on the medical system from an unexpected source, and that's the fact that because of the cancellation of most other procedures, many healthcare providers are in a cash crunch. And one of the major things that they're asking for is the same thing that other businesses are asking for, is we need to be able to safely restart procedures that provide the resources that keep our doors open. Likely that's going to be a big part of the federal bailout. But in the short term, I think you're seeing layoffs, the result of a cash flow crisis.
The other thing, I'll just jump in there really quick on that with one more close. I'll tell you, in Pierce County, the coordination between public health and our healthcare facilities, we've got two primary kind of big level hospital systems in Pierce County. The coordination there was very good, and the collaboration. And I will tell you, the work when we were concerned that we would be facing a significant surge that would overwhelm our hospital capacity, boy, people really stepped up to make sure that we were kind of converting regular beds to ICU beds, the way that our healthcare system and our healthcare professionals, our doctors and nurses, and all those folks rallied around that was exceptional. In this case, you've got elective medical procedures that were shut down, and you had doctors that kind of, maybe a dermatologist going in and being prepared to step up and take care of folks who had COVID patients. I just think the way that our healthcare community rallied around that was impressive. And we're very thankful in Washington State that we didn't, I know that up in Snohomish and King County, I would say that I remember from their numbers, their ICU beds were strained, but their overall hospital capacity, I think, was still largely intact. And I would tell you, in Pierce County, we had both general medical surgical beds available at capacity and ICU beds available. So the collaboration that was done and the planning was really done well and helped avert that problem. And I think that planning and that work by those healthcare professionals will yield us fruit in the event of a second wave of this, or whatever virus might follow on COVID someday. The fact that they practiced it will put us in good stead.
This next question is for Minority Leader Wilcox. What is your opinion on schools being closed? Do you believe there should be legislative action to lengthen future school years to make up for it, or some other action? Also, some are saying with school out, they should have reduced or no property taxes. Would you support that?
Well, first, I should say my wife is a school teacher, and she is assigning work to her class. She's a 7th and 8th grade math teacher, and I think every school district, at least the ones that I'm aware of, are trying pretty hard to do as much education as is possible, which is much harder in the parts of the state where you don't have very good broadband. I've asked for an accounting of the costs that were saved as a result of school closures. The truth is, when there's 295 different school districts, it's really hard to have a request like that fulfilled, given bureaucratic realities. And there is a lot of complication because of the political position that the WEA and local education associations occupy in Washington state politics. So I guess I would rather have seen a wait and see attitude towards, do we have to cancel school for the whole year? I think it's unlikely that we will add days onto the end of every year. I don't think that in budgetary terms, we're going to have the extra dollars that will be required to add significantly to the length of school terms in the future. And I totally sympathize with people that feel like they're not getting that service and they paid for it. However, until we know how much savings was achieved by not having schools open, and I think it's going to be disappointingly small, the schools are not going to have the resources to repay those dollars.
JT, do you think the governor will call a special session in the next 6 or 7 weeks here to deal with the budget, the impending budget deficit? And where do you think he's going to focus his efforts in making cuts?
Well, I do think that we will have a special session probably after the beginning of June, because that's when the next budget forecast comes in. The other metric that I think is going to be equally important as a revenue forecast is what is happening with the federal dollars, what strings are attached to those. And what I'm hoping will happen, and I heard David Schumacher, the director of the governor's budget team, talk about the fact that it's not going to be a short-term problem, it's going to be a long-term problem. So I think that they are going to be thinking at least about the 4-year outlook rather than just the current biennium. And where are they going to look? Well, let's be realistic and look at what the priorities of the legislative majority is. They're Democratic majorities in both houses. We've got a Democratic governor. So I think you're going to continue to see them pursue the concerns that they have been for the last couple of years. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about increased taxes. That's already started. You are going to see the greatest possible effort to preserve public employee wages. You're going to see efforts to preserve teachers' wages. And you're going to see a demand, I think, that business either pay more in taxes or pay more in fees. That's an immense risk, I think, in the either the special session or the general session that will begin again in January 2021. And by the way, I should say the way a special session like this is most likely to work is there will be a 4-corner agreement that these are the things that will be considered. And the caucus leaders are usually pretty successful at holding to that agreement. I would be concerned, though. We've got 2 new caucus leaders for the majority caucuses, and they've not been through this as leaders. And they are going to, in the end, run the show because those are majorities. And I've told people many times,
Did we lose JT?
Sounds like we've lost him. Well, actually, we're just about out of time, Mark. Any final words, anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Executive Dammeier and House Minority Leader JT Wilcox for joining us today. I think there's a lot of information. We've been collecting questions, and at WPC, we'll try and answer as many of those as we can. And send us your ideas. If you're in an industry that you know there are some things that could be done to help get this thing moving again, send them in, and we'll start looking at them and see what we can do there. But we're doing our own work, obviously, as well to figure out the best way to get us out of this from a policy perspective. So again, thank you for attending today. I hope this was useful for our attendees, and let us know how you thought we did, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and be sure to check out WashingtonPolicy.org. On our front page, we have our one-stop shop for COVID-19 policy recommendations. As our Small Business Center Director, Mark Harmsworth, alluded to, we have some extra questions that we have, and we'll be addressing those later on a blog. And then next week on Earth Day, we have another webinar specific to Earth Day. You can see all the details on that and get yourself registered for that event coming up on April 22nd at WashingtonPolicy.org. Thank you so much.